won't come to an end until 1648. And in 1648, you will have the signing of what's known as the Treaty of Westphalia. And in that treaty, you will find provisions that established the idea that Catholics acknowledged Protestants had the right to worship as they pleased, as they chose, and Protestants acknowledged that Catholics had the right to worship as they chose. And so, again, what that represents is the establishment of the principle of religious toleration. And again, it's important to note the use of the word toleration. If you tolerate somebody, that doesn't necessarily mean you like them. Doesn't even mean you respect them. Okay? You're just willing to tolerate them. Okay? So this isn't, again, where Catholics and Protestants became all touchy and feely toward each other, with hugs and kisses. It's just the situation had reached a point where now Catholic and Protestant leaders simply acknowledged that the killing had to stop. The violence had to come to an end. Enough. So Catholics leave Protestants alone. Protestants leave Catholics alone. And so that's what we have. Now, in this period then, again, among the areas that will become Protestant will be Northern Germany, the Scandinavian countries, Denmark, England, Scotland. So again, these areas to the north and northwest will become Protestant. And again, if you note when all of this is happening, 1517, that's the same year Ferdinand Magellan embarked on his voyage around the world. 2 years after the Reformation, that's when Cortez and his group stumbled across Tenochtitlan and the Aztecs. So the Protestant Reformation is just beginning as these crucial events are taking place that will transform Europe. And this is what will, again, fuel much of the competition, if you will, for carving up and a kind of asserting control over various parts of the Americas, will be this tension between Catholics and Protestants. And so when the Habsburgs began to build upon their wealth, as they, again, seized control of the Aztec gold and the Inca gold, this will also be considered to be an advance for Catholicism. And then as Protestant countries like England get involved in the colonization game, this is considered to be advancing the interests of Protestantism. And so religion does get caught up in the economic and political interests that are developing because of the discoveries and explorations of the Americas. And again, for those who were among the early English colonists, not the earliest, but among the early ones, a group that many of you probably will recognize once I present their name as we know them. the Puritans were among the more religious. And because of the focus of the Puritans on religion, and because of their interest in religion, what we'll find is that this helps set the stage for what becomes a confused idea later about the centrality of religion in the establishment of the early American colonies. Once again, I find myself needing a map, so I'm just going to locate it. And here we go. Again, this map highlights the religious situation about 1560. So this is a few decades, about the midway point of the Protestant Reformation between 1517 and 1648. And these areas that are yellow become what is known as Lutheran. One of the early Catholic monks who will become one of the ones demanding reform will be a man named Martin Luther. And so eventually, those who became the followers of Luther become Lutherans. In Switzerland, and in these areas that are shaded this kind of bluish color, they're going to become the followers of another Protestant reformer named John Calvin. And the Calvinists will then begin to move into these areas. Calvinism, as their brand of Protestantism is known, will move into areas further east as well as further west and northwest. And so it's the followers of John Calvin who are the ones that I want us to focus on in particular. The Puritans were English Calvinists. And so, again, what you have is John Calvin is the name of the Protestant reformer. He establishes a Protestant denomination, Calvinism, and then his followers are Calvinists. And what's going to happen is in England in particular, there is going to be a lot of shifting back and forth between Catholic and Protestant. It's going to be the Tudor King of England, Henry VIII, that will initially declare England to be a Protestant country. But then, when Henry died without an heir, or he died with a son who became king briefly, but then his son, Edward IV, died before having a child. That set the stage for Henry's oldest daughter, Mary. And you can refer to that list of English kings on one of the earlier handouts from the first unit, if you need to. But Mary was the surviving daughter from Henry's first marriage, and she was born and raised a Catholic because Henry at that point was Catholic as well. And so then Mary is going to return England to the Catholic fold. Now, by this time, there are a significant number of Protestants living in England. And when Mary reestablishes Catholicism as the official religion of England, she gives English Protestants the choice. They can either reconvert to Catholicism where they can leave. If they chose none of the above, then they risked execution. And during the 5-year period of time between 1553 and 1558, when Mary ruled as Queen Mary I of England, she will end up burning at the stake over 300 English Protestants who refused to convert back to Catholicism and who refused to leave. And again, this is where Mary will earn the designation Bloody Mary. And so, now, when Mary died, by the time Mary became queen, she was well beyond childbearing age. So, and she had no children prior to her becoming queen. And so then she died without an heir. And so then it went to her younger sister, who was the first daughter of Henry's second marriage. And that is Elizabeth I. Now, Elizabeth I was born and raised a Protestant. And so she then restores Protestantism in England. And so what's going to happen as all of this is developing are those English Protestants who chose to leave. Many of them will end up in Switzerland, where they will come under the influence of the teachings of John Calvin. And then when Elizabeth became queen and reestablished Protestantism, then many of these English Protestants will return. And again, these Protestants who had initially fled to Switzerland, who then return, will be those who we recognize in American history as the Puritans. But again, they were English Calvinists. Now, eventually, by the early 1570s, England is going to be ahead of the game regarding much of the rest of Europe. Elizabeth will enact what's known as the Act of Toleration. And what this measure did is it simply allowed English Catholics the right to worship freely. So, again, England was officially a Protestant country. But then those who were Catholics who were living within England, they could worship freely without restriction. Now, English Catholics were prohibited from holding political office. Because again, this is happening in the 1570s when Europe is still steeped in the wars of religion that were unleashed by the Protestant Reformation. And so the idea then, many of England's gravest enemies, notably Spain, very Catholic, a very Catholic country. And so the fear was that if Catholics were allowed to be elected or appointed to political office, then if they came across secret or sensitive information, they may reveal that information to their fellow Catholics. In other words, the fear was they may be Catholic first, English second. So again, just rather than risk that, the Act of Toleration allowed Catholics to worship freely, but other restrictions and other limitations on Catholics remained in place because of the tension between these different Catholic and Protestant groups that are emerging in the 15 and 1600s. Now, what's going to happen then will be the Calvinists are going to be the ones who introduce what becomes a fundamental concept within Western civilization, a transforming concept. And that